Hello, welcome everyone. Today we have another discussion. This time we have with us Anant, Jayant, Natu. Welcome, Anant.
Thanks, Sunil.
Yeah, and also we have Kunjbihari Daga. Welcome, Kunj.
Yeah, thank you, Sunil. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so both of them are associate partners at MicroSave. So I think before we go on with the discussion about GovTech or government technology and that interesting topic, maybe both of you can tell us a little bit about MicroSave in brief.
Sure. So let me take a first stab at it. So Sunil, MSC is a boutique consulting firm. It's about 25 years old now. It started its operation in Africa. Subsequent and it kind of started working in the area of financial inclusion, microfinance. That's what it started with in Africa, essentially. Around mid-noughties, around 2005 is when MSC opened its offices in India, and we played a big role in the microfinance industry back then, which was a sunrise industry. Eventually, we moved into financial inclusion, and we started working more and more on identifying what could be the different channels and different products which could improve financial inclusion, which could accelerate the pace of financial inclusion. And we were at the right space and time, because even the government had provided a lot of impetus, if you recall, around that time, around financial inclusion. And perhaps we were the only perhaps amongst the very few who were working in the area of agent banking. How do you accelerate the pace of financial inclusion by having more and more of agent networks, by having deeper agent networks? And that somehow got us in the eyes of the government, as in they recognized that there is this agency, and we started working very closely with the government since then, but still largely in the area of financial inclusion, microfinance, thereabout. But this is around 2011, 2012 I'm talking about. Over last 10 years, our engagement with the government has deepened. So as we speak, we work not just on financial inclusion, that of course continues to be our mainstay, but we also work around food, fertilizer, fuel, nutrition. So those are some issues which really sort of we are recognized for. So that's with the government, and also the topic of this discussion today, which is on public finance reform. So that's again a big piece that we are working with government, and of course subsequently I'll come to that. But yeah, so from financial inclusion, starting working in Africa, to coming to India, diversifying beyond India to Southeast Asia and some other geographies, and then working with government onto the other areas, and also then working on some of the other areas in development, things like agriculture, climate change. So those are the other areas we work in. So fairly, I would say, a varied offering that we provide as a boutique consulting firm. Yeah, I'll just pause there and see if Kunj has anything to add there.
Yeah, thanks, Anant. That was a quick brief about MicroSave, and so what Anant talked about is how we have evolved, right? And now what we are getting onto is basically being part of the digital transformation journeys that a lot of governments and these entities are taking. So as part of that, like in broader those reforms, we were more focused on the policy and the process aspects of those, right? Now the focus eventually includes the digital bit also quite a bit. Right. So our solutions recommendations have a lot of digital interventions and things around that, tech interventions, digital interventions, etc.
Yeah. So I think we can maybe get straight into this financial inclusion, because I've been hearing for years that a big chunk of the population has been it has been excluded from the financial system of the world. The financial system of the world, it only suits middle class, and the lower class have. But a lot of action has taken place. The public finance architecture of digital tools is huge. One is the Jan Dhan Yojana, direct brand transfer, 300 million bank accounts. Second is this India Stack. I mean, India Stack is the largest open API network of the world, and we have UPI. UPI is also some 150 million, and people all over the world are talking of it. It may go to Russia, and also they're talking of open network for, digital commerce or ONDC. So I was just thinking maybe we can like dig deep into this financial inclusion. So much is happening. So maybe from your point of view, if you can brief our viewers about this.
Yeah, no, Sunil. So I think that's a great observation, and what has really accelerated India's pace of financial inclusion. Of course, there has been a lot of policy support. There has been a lot of impetus from the government, but somewhere I think there has also been coming together of a lot of different strands, and technology being the most important one. So I think the whole revolution that we had around digital identity, which Aadhaar had brought about. Similarly, the whole innovation around which was led by NPCI around the payment systems, the payment architecture, right? And as you know, both these digital IDs and payment architecture are part of India stack, and they provide what is called as the digital public good. And what has enabled India to accelerate financial inclusion is that most of the things that we have achieved over last decade or so has kind of been built on these two critical substrates of digital identity and a very robust payment architecture. So most of the countries that struggle with financial inclusion are having this real first order problem where some of these basic things have not been sorted out. And India was lucky to have these two things in place, which has really sort of got us to next level, next orbit. And you mentioned about DBT, the direct benefit transfer. We all know the pace with which during the COVID times, the government could wire the benefits directly to the account of the beneficiaries. All of that could happen in such a jiffy, precisely because of the work that had happened over the last few years around ensuring that each one of us, there was a universal bank account, and also ensuring that there was a payment architecture to support these wire transfers. Kunj, if you want to add.
Yeah. So fundamentally, as Anant has said, looking at the scale and the kind of population that India have, right? So we had our own unique challenges in terms of addressing these problems, and rightly so. Like the team which worked on the UIDI and those MPCI bit, right? They did not follow that conventional approach of adopting any standard some applications and things like that, right? They went on understanding the unique problems that India have and identifying a unique solution for that problem, right? And the entire approach of that, adopting it as a platform, right, or building it as a platform, has played a big role, right? So now identity UIDI was supposed to be just one common identity to be shared for multiple users, right? Now that has become a fundamental and core, thanks to the way the UIDI allows to help those eKYC happen, or those identity verifications happen, right? Likewise for the DBT, right? The entire NPCI stack, right, was more for making those payments across, facilitating those payments in a very streamlined manner. But that entire DBT game has changed because of that, right? And government has got a lot of massive saving. And because of these things being popularized with the help of these all payment wallets and things like that, that whole thing has just accelerated, right, in terms of the adoption and the people being using all of these kind of platform in a very, very simplistic manner.
So actually we are all well aware of the success stories and all, but then what about the other side? I mean, what more do we have to do? What hasn't been done? And especially since you are in this, MicroSave is in that. So maybe if you can tell us what are the challenges and what remains to be done, and what MicroSave, has been involved in your observations in that.
Yeah, so if you really look at it and the way our own approach to financial inclusion has changed, and it kind of reflects our own evolution of thinking on this part, all said and done, finance is just a superstructure, right? You have you have these sectors of economy. Unless those sectors of the economy are not doing well, finance is not really going to do much to change that. So that's when, as a consulting firm, we very deliberately shifted our focus to working on some of the what could be called as the areas that relate to the sustainable development goals. So things like health, nutrition, education, infrastructure were some of the issues that got us really interested. And we started looking and we started engaging more and more with the problems in these sectors, right? Climate change, for instance, right? So these different topics really got us interested. And the way we started was because we came from a financial, sort of more from financial services viewpoint. Our point of entry in most of these sectors was to look at it through a finance angle. But eventually, as we grew in expertise, now we have dedicated teams with sectoral experts working on this. Now, while that thinking was evolving, and when we started working more deeply in the sectors, we realized that, especially and since we work very closely with the government, we realized that. So we keep talking about the delivery challenges, let's say in education, healthcare, and we are all well aware of it, right? And COVID has brought a lot of those sort of chinks quite clearly. But what we realized is there is this whole thing around upstream issues that also needs a lot of consideration, right? So when I say upstream, what I really mean is that if you were to look at why is it that, let's say, the state of delivery in hospitals, public hospitals, or in public schools, or in some of the other sort of public goods sector, why is it so pathetic? No, I shouldn't say pathetic. There has been a lot of improvement over the last several decades. But yeah, there's still a lot to be expected, right? Now, the way we have approached this problem is to see that how is it that the funds actually flow? What are the state capacity constraints? What are the things that constrains the state from delivering these services in the best possible manner, right? So in terms of the next frontier, that's really the next frontier for us at MSc Consulting, to see that when our concerns are the most vulnerable sections of the society, the people at the bottom pyramid who are most dependent on the government services and the public services, how can we improve their experience of these public services? And the way to do that is to immerse oneself in the current problems with the government system, in the delivery of those services, and then sort of dissect those problems and use specific solves for those problems. And as probably Kunj might add later, we approach it from a very technology perspective. We look at some of these specific technology solutions that can solve for these problems. I'll just pause there if Kunj has points to add there, and then maybe I can explain this.
Rightly. Yeah, so rightly put by Anant, right? Like, again, see, there is a lot of work which has gone in terms of, having that entire Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile stack, right? And which brought in a lot of people into that entire, that banking and with those kind of stuff. Now, the challenge is with those other kind of services, right? There hasn't been the enough focus on maybe the healthcare related services, right? Of course, there was Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which was launched, right? Which has included so many people by offering them cards and, free healthcare treatment. But still, a lot of people face challenges, right? Especially in the urban setup, right? Wherein they go to the hospitals, private hospitals for certain things. And there are two parts of challenges, right? When we look from the hospital's perspective, right, there's a challenge in terms of unpaid dues by the government, right? Like wherein the people who have taken the treatments, but government has not paid them on time, right? The second, on the part of the citizen, when some of the people, because of these claims not settled, they haven't got their entitlements back from the government, right? Likewise, there are other schemes in terms of Manrega, right? Wherein when there are at certain places and in certain setups, right, there are delays in the payment for these, right? These are daily wage earners, right? They cannot afford to have going without pay for so many days and all. So these are certain kind of challenges or the issues that we see, and we believe that technology can be adopted in these areas to now address those problems of the deltas, right, which are left out, or which are like kind of not addressed so far in terms of being in the mainstream, right? The financial services, adding them to banking, and all have been in the mainstream so far, right? Now we have to bring all of these things into the mainstream, where we solve all of these challenges and look at from both perspectives, right? The service providers, the government, and the citizen.
And Sunil, if I may just quickly add to that, if you were to sort of look at the problems that or let's say we generally call it as the state capacity constraints, we all understand that the Indian state has got certain capacity constraints. Broadly speaking, we could sort of divide it into three sort of parts. One are the finance related constraints, which is the constraints with the way the money moves from the consolidated fund or to, let's say, the final end beneficiaries. And these end beneficiaries could be, as Kunj mentioned, citizens, for instance, in the case of Narega. These could be vendors, these could be business people. who have decided to work for the governments. These are the contractors who are expecting. So in fact, I was reading the report the other day. There are currently outstanding dues of roughly 5 or 6 lakh crores, which is due on the government agencies and the public sector units. So that's really a finance related problem. Then there are a lot of process related problems. So let's say poor contract management, right? The contracts are not properly inked, for instance. There could be errors in the way the beneficiaries of a certain program get targeted, or there could be issues with interdepartmental coordination. There could be inefficient workflows. There could be poor data management. So these are essentially process related issues. So that's the second category. And third really are the people related issues. And we all have seen the way some of the government employees could be demotivated. They don't properly sort of respond to the citizen queries. So a lot of that is related to lack of proper incentive alignment. It could be lack of performance management. In some cases, in fact, in most cases, it's also got to do with understaffing. So when we really sort of dug deep into what are the state capacity challenges, we realized that it could be bucketed into these three broad areas: finance related, process related, and people related. And for each of these, the idea was to look for specific technology interventions that can solve for these challenges. And a lot of the work that we have done over the past 2-3 years, and our team, of which Kunj and I are a part, focuses on really identifying what is the problem and then looking for a corresponding tech solve for that problem.
Yeah, so okay, thanks for that explanation. So like you've talked of the infrastructure, the financial system, finance, people, policies, but you both of you talked there were some 2-3 things, like one, you talked of climate change and sustainability, you talk of food, fertilizer, that's agri-tech. Then you also talked of healthcare system and all, like I took health tech and also of the education system, ed tech. Now, what is the status of these 3 technologies? How much in the last 2 years have we gone forward? Is the government ready to give it to the last mile? Like 2 years back, I read one Ernst & Young report which said that agri-tech potential is not even 1% of what it can be. Means it can be 100-fold. So if I just to ask, like one is you told from the process, finance, people, policies point of view, from the point of view of maybe one by one, what is the state of agri-tech, health tech, ed tech in India, and how can the government take it to the last mile? Again, since you have been consultants, maybe you can give some examples also.
So shall I take that, Anant?
Yeah, Kunj, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So if you see, like, so again, a very, very relevant question in terms of the work that we are trying to do, and how these things are evolving in the government setup, right? And how government are thinking. So now, first of all, talking about the agri-tech, right? The agri-tech part of it, right? So in agri-tech, if you see, right, like predominantly, in India, if you see the majority of the states and all, there are a lot of, small scale producers, right? There are very few large scale producers wherein they own a piece of land which is greater than 2 hectares and stuff like that, right? There are small scale producers. Now, these small scale producers have a unique challenge, right? One is they are not digitally enabled, right? They are not qualified enough, right? They are not aware of the government schemes which are launched, right? Because there is a lot of, I would say media disconnect with them, right? So in terms of all of these things, what government brings in, right? The predominant mode of communication is either through, the newspapers you say, or maybe, through media articles you say and stuff like that, right? Which are kind of not so accessible to them, right? So in order to bridge that gap, right, there are unique programs being run, across different states, right? And these programs are basically to, the way these small scale producers understand things, right? Or how can government provides the stuff which these guys need. So it is more in terms of, the market linkages. It is more in terms of, a better quality input, that they can take it from. Right. And now there are various ways and means which are being figured out to deliver this information to these small scale producers. Right. So either in terms of, having those phygital kind of interfaces, right, wherein, you have those kind of small setups where they come and sell their produce, right, whatever they build, or, those Anganwadi centers and stuff like that. Right. So one is information dissemination through those channels. And second is basically building the ecosystem using the technology for them, to connect to a larger world. Right. So wherein, let's say there are input suppliers and there are those consumers, right, who want the finished product, right? They will be connected through these platforms, right? And using those digital channels, right, these SSPs can be integrated into system. So such kind of innovations are basically coming up. There's a larger, there is a IDEA framework, what they call, right, which is being developed by Ministry of Agriculture, and then the states are working on their own ecosystem, their own systems, and then which will link back to IDEA in terms of rolling it out, right? The second thing you ask in terms of the health tech, right? In the health tech world, if you see, right, again, what we have talked about the challenges, right? Government had rolled out policy in terms of PMJAY, right? Janarog, right? Now they have included people, but now still there's a lot of, what do you say, communication gap in terms of how to leverage this, right? Or how to leverage this in best possible manner, right? So for that as well, right, we need basically, all of these tech interventions like that Anand pointed out, right? Like how do we get these issues of finances solved for both citizens as well as service providers, right? How do we get that? And that is where, MSc particularly, we have worked on the smart payment, solution and the just-in-time funding kind of solution. Those are the ideas that we have worked on. And these basically helps in terms of real-time claim adjudication kind of issues. Right, so we want to solve those things in terms of claim, settlement problem through, these system-based approaches, wherein we use rule-based processing. A lot of those manual discretional decisions have to be, moved in terms of logic in the system, right? Which can be rule-based decisioning done as part of the system using, all sophisticated technologies, AI, and things like that. Right. And the third is the edtech you talked about, right? Education technology, right? So that is where, anyways, like there is a lot of, thing already going on. There are Byju's and so many other, platforms which already exist in terms of that. But, there is a need fundamentally to strengthen the government provided education, right? To strengthen all of those, schools, right? Which government runs as part of that. Right. So wherein these all technologies can be leveraged. One is on the training of the teachers and, how they are best, aware of the things going on around the world. Right. And second is for bringing that quality, thing to the students. And if you have seen, right, the PM's vision or whatever, as part of the new education policy, they've thought nothing. They don't want to centralize everything to the English language, right? They want to deliver those content in regional languages, right? So let's say those contents are produced in collaboration with the states and those, NGOs working and, government. And then, they figure out the challenges using technology to disseminate all of those knowledge to student teachers and, the entire ecosystem of education, right? How we can bring in other partners to deliver those services, right? Within the kind of setups those government have. Right. This is my bit. Maybe Anant, you can add to it.
Yeah, no. So I think just to add a couple of bits, especially on the agri-tech, I think one very promising trend, at least in the agri-tech space, because I've worked a bit on that bit, has been that if you look at the entire sort of the agriculture value chain, or let's say the agriculture cycle, you'll find that you have the agri-techs in all these steps. So for instance, if you think of planning, that's the first stage in agriculture, right? You plan, then you prepare land, then you source inputs, then there's on-farm production, and then you basically go and market. So for instance, a company like Cropin is at a planning stage. Then even at a land preparation stage, you have several agtechs which actually focus on those technologies. So using GIS-based technology, and some of the other stuff, telemetry, you will find them engaged in a lot of services that fall during the time of land preparation. Similarly for sourcing input. So companies like, let's say, AgroStar, EM3, Gramophone, which are focusing on sourcing of inputs. Then of course, Ninja Cards and some of the other are pretty well-known names when it comes to the marketing of output. So I think that's been one very promising trend in agri-tech, that rather than being limited at just one part of the value chain, the agri-tech firms have been fairly widely spread across all of these different stages of play when it comes to agriculture.
So, anyway, thank you. You explained everything, the entire process, infrastructure, the problems, and we have broken it by agri-tech and all. So I'm just saying, going forward, what are the, technologies, deep tech, emerging tech, cutting edge technologies that can take India forward? AI, ML, IoT, robotics, VR. So is there any work being done on that? So I'm just curious to know, because you talked of like last 10 years. You have explained very nicely what last 10 years, the current. But like if you have to go for the next 10 years, you'll need a totally different technology. What are those technologies, and are we ready for that? Because it's not just us. The government has to be ready. The industry has to be ready. The experts have to be ready.
Yes.
So where do we stand in that?
Yeah, no, truly, like all the technologies that you named, right? Like pretty much, all of them have a role to play in terms of where we want to take India to, right? And to bring all of those things to the last mile, right? When I say last mile, to the bottom of the pyramid, every single citizen, right? In terms of that, right? And it is not possible to cover ground just manually, right? The technology has to be there. So if you look at some of the experience which have gone and where a lot of progress and a lot of investments are happening, and in terms of the forward thinking happening, right? Now all the land surveys, right, as part of that agriculture stack, has helped basically give the specific advisory to the farmer in terms of the weather, in terms of how should they be taking care of the crop, when do they need to put up the time to pesticide based on image analytics and things like that, right? So a lot of role these has to play in terms of if you see the work happening on the infrastructure side, right? The road development, or all of those, the technology has a role to play, right? Like instead of today, right, the practice being followed is some engineer goes on the site, does a physical measurement, and all of those things are offline recorded and then brought back, and basis those the payments are made to the vendors, right? Why not use some drones and all of those to capture the image, process the image, and do some quality analysis using those images, right? So to fasten this entire process, right, in terms of the progress, right? If you see the another part of it, basically from the health aspect, right? So in the health, there have been a lot of innovations around the world, wherein how do you do all of these analysis of the health and manage those health records properly, right? Now in terms of when these patients visit the facility, right, how we can smoothen that entire process, because as of today, that is all a very heavy touch kind of process, right? They have to physically move every single place, right? Why can't a health record be available with the doctor as and when a specific citizen walks in, right? So how do we digitize this health data of the citizen, right? How do we bring, like, again, the next example, and there was an article a few days back, right? There's a lot of pendency of the cases in the court, right? Like in terms of the whole thing is piling up, but no specific interventions have been done, right, in order to solve. Of course, there was some digitization of all of those case records, etc., have been done, but there's a lot of play that some deep technologies can play over there in terms of understanding all of those things, and analytics around that can be brought in to simplify, or maybe to help judiciary to expedite or solve those things properly. So if we see another example is basically the entire thing government is going ahead in terms of the fortified rice, right? So government wants to distribute 100% of fortification through all of these PDS system and fair price shop. All of the rice being distributed have to be fortified, right? Now the entire value chain today, what is that? It is basically again a very heavy touch, manually driven kind of processes, right? Why can't these be modernized using IoT, when the quality across the value chain is ensured using some sophisticated IoTs, which is plugged into these ecosystems of premix manufacturers and FRK manufacturers and millers and all, right? So technology. Without technology, I don't think we can just take a leap from what we are doing today. Technology will definitely be a great enabler, right, in terms of doing all of those things in a much better manner.
Yeah, and Kunj, if I may just add, responding to Sunil's question, we usually talk in terms of AI, ML, or blockchain. So because these get more eyeballs, right, and people get interested. But actually, the real work on technology is far more laborious and not that that interesting, so to speak, or let's say that charming. So because it's again, if you were to look at between form and content, a lot of work requires to be done in the terms of form. It's not really the content or the technology products that will really make a change. What we're really talking about here is Things like going for platforms-based approach, for instance, right? Or making sure that different departments that work, they work on a single source of data. Different systems that are there, they are able to share their APIs, right? So most of the systems that get developed are not monoliths which don't talk to each other, but rather allow for easy exchange of data through open APIs. Then you're talking of microservices and modular design. You're talking of digital data layers. You're talking of common data standards. You're talking of so these are really the things which are not really common currency, right? But these really fall in the domain of how do you get a proper IT architecture or data architecture, right? It's like saying that you build a house and your house is only as good as your architecture, right? You might want to have all kinds of fancy sofas and dining tables, but if you have weird design, so the moment you enter the room, moment you enter the house, let's say you first enter into kitchen, no one does that, right? You have some, so it's like basically getting that design, that IT, the data architecture correct, the IT architecture correct. And that's where some of these IT principles find their application. Rest of it, what typically finds the newsy items like AI, ML, blockchain are really not so much that should concern us. It's about getting our data architecture and IT architecture and tech architecture right here, using some of these principles. Yeah. So just wanted to add that too.
Yeah, so I think I got a feel of the past, present, and future. So I got most of it. Any parting words? I mean, maybe what's your MicroSave vision or anything we have missed out? Maybe we can just end with that.
Yeah, so maybe see what I believe is basically the kind of work that we are doing, or the things that we are talking about, right? In order to implement that, right, there has to be a lot of acceptability within the government, right, in terms of the forward thinking approach by the bureaucrats, right, because they are the implementer on ground, right? So they have progressed quite a bit, right, for past decade. If you see, there's a lot of adoption of technology and all those things happen. But the point what Anant talked about, right, that requires a lot of collaboration as well, right? In India, we have that particular problem of silos, right? So let's say any department, let's say today you want to reach out to the bottom of pyramid, and you are ahead of one of the schemes, right? So, and you are addressing maybe something to do with social security, or maybe giving some money in lieu of something, right? So you will create your own beneficiary database, right? Like you will identify people as part of this beneficiary scheme, and then you target that, right? The person taking up the same task, they end up creating another beneficiary database, right? Why don't we try to bring it together, right? So that is basically the more of collaboration and coherence, right? If that exists as part of government, right, that can in fact help solve things very quickly, right? And second is the adaptability in terms of adopting all of these new technologies, right? So there has to be some kind of capacity building that government has to do, right, for these bureaucrats to understand, right, how technology can enable these. This will definitely accelerate the pace of all of these innovations coming on ground, right? And that is where MSc basically we play a role. So we as when we work on these ideas, right, we have a very a good collaboration with all of these government entities, or maybe you can say the entire bureaucracy, right, which implements that. And we try to do that particular in terms of handholding, in terms of working with them to get these things quickly out, maybe in terms of pilot, in terms of a large scale implementation planning, and so on and so forth, right? Maybe, yeah, that's from me. Anant, you want to add anything to that?
No, just one thought is that Sunil, actually, for a country like India, there is the government will continue to play an important and outsized role in the foreseeable future. And what really fires us, the team at MSc, clearly is to how do you get government to be more effective in its implementation, right? And for that, how do we leverage technology? And when I say technology, I really mean some of the more basic stuff, or the first principle stuff. How do you get the basic systems in design? How do you get the workflows in place, right? To ensure that government is effective, government is able to deliver the services. MSc's mission itself is to strive for economic, social and financial inclusion. Now that dream will remain unachieved till the time government is not effective. Because as I said, the poor, probably people who are better off, tend to secede from the government services. We don't send our kids to government schools, or we don't go to public healthcare, but poor do, right? And the only hope that we have to be a successful democracy and a well-functioning democracy is to make sure that the state capacity is enhanced. And for that, yeah, and that's really what fires MSC in its current avatar. Yeah.
Thank you so. Yeah, thank you so much for that. So that sounds good. Thank you.